So, as all of you know, because of the coronavirus, we're not going to be meeting. We're not going to be having Bible study because the authorities, both religious and secular, have encouraged us to take this thing very serious. And while it's not crazy here in Indiana yet, it is elsewhere. And so we're going to be doing that. In the meantime, I wanted to still have something like a Bible study, and so I was going to record the Bible studies that we were going to do and post them on YouTube for you guys to enjoy, and hopefully this will suffice throughout the rest of Lent. And so, where we left off, we did first the event where Jesus rose Lazarus from the tomb, which concluded in John 11:54, where it says that Jesus left to go to Ephraim after the conspiracy to kill him really got underway. And then we followed up by reading some messianic prophecy about when the Messiah was going to come and how he was going to die. And so today we're going to begin with Jesus' final ascent to Jerusalem. And that begins in Luke 18:31 through 43. This is, of course, the last year of Jesus' ministry. This is 33 AD. Passover is coming, and Jesus is looking to the south, and he's going to take his final walk down the Jordan to Jerusalem. Again, he's currently in Ephraim, having fled there at the conclusion of John 11. Then he took the 12 aside and said, "See, we are going to Jerusalem, and everything that is written about the Son of Man by the prophets will be accomplished. For he will be handed over to the Gentiles, and he will be mocked and insulted and spat upon. After they have flogged him, they will kill him, and on the third day he will rise again." But they understood nothing of these things. In fact, what he said was hidden from them, and they did not grasp what he said. There's a funny thing, as I speak for myself now, there's a funny thing that happens whenever Jesus talks. He talks so often in riddles and mysteries that in John 11:14, I like it when John just says, "Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead," because it seems as if Jesus speaking plainly is such an uncharacteristic event. And anyways, so in this passage, he's yet again being very plain, but his disciples don't realize it. He's spelling out precisely what's going to happen when he goes down to Jerusalem. He's going to be handed over to the Romans, and he's going to suffer this death. Just a couple details here. It says on the third day he will rise again. That, of course, means that if you count the days, Friday, part of Friday, that still counts as the first day. Part of Friday, Saturday, and then part of Sunday. That makes the third day being Sunday. And of course, some people, as you guys know, get bent out of shape out of the phrase rise again, but that just means that he's coming to, life again. It doesn't mean he rises more than once, but you guys know that. Anyways, so his disciples didn't understand this, and you might ask, why is that? Well, as we've mentioned tons of times before, it's because of a false understanding of what the Messiah was going to do. They understood that the Messiah was going to set up the throne of King David again, and he was going to rule from Jerusalem in a kingdom which is going to spread over the entire world, and there's going to be armies and conquering and material wealth flowing into Jerusalem, and that's just not how it was going to go. But even until after the resurrection, the apostles and the disciples couldn't get that thought out of their head. It's not because they were dumb, it's because the prophetic literature, as we're going to see later on, really gives one that impression. So anyways, Jesus says this, and they begin their trip southward through Jericho to Jerusalem. So in verse 35, as he approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting on the roadside begging. And when he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, "Jesus of Nazareth is passing by." Then he shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Those who were in front sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he shouted even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." All right, let's pause here for another second. So often when this is read from the lectern, the person will read it monotone. But just imagine yourself on scene. Imagine yourself on the street side where this blind man is shouting at the top of his lungs. And it's only natural for people to say to him, hey, quiet down, don't bother Jesus. But he persists, and he uses this phrase, son of David. What does that mean? Well, from what I understand, in the Hebrew and Aramaic language, they didn't have different words for son and grandson. If you were the male descendant of someone, you're simply called his son. And so this is an acknowledgement that Jesus is the son of David. It means that this guy is acknowledging Jesus as king. All right, let's keep going. Verse 40. Jesus stood still and ordered the man to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked him, what do you want for me to do? And that's a really interesting question, because it seems obvious enough what a blind man wants from him. But Jesus oftentimes asks this question. At the beginning of John's Gospel, he says to the disciples, what are you looking for? He says to the paralytic, what do you want me to do? It's worth reflecting on that Jesus, his first priority in many of these times is the spiritual thing. And the physical thing is simply the sign of the spiritual thing that he's trying to bring about. The blind man said, let me see again. And Jesus said to him, receive your sight, your faith has saved you. And immediately he regained his sight and followed him, glorifying God, and all the people, when they saw it, praised God. Okay, so we just had a big public miracle as we're on our way down to Jerusalem, where a man is given his sight. This is, of course, one of the signs of the Messiah that people were expecting. I recently learned in the Dead Sea Scrolls there was some things that the Essenes wrote about what they expected the Messiah to do, and one of them was to give sight to the blind. So this is just yet another sign made to the public that Jesus is the Messiah. All right, now we're going to switch Gospels. We're going to go over to Matthew chapter 20, verse 20 through 28. This would take place just after they're leaving Jericho, I believe. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, as say James and John, came to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, what do you want? She said to him, say that these two sons of mine will sit, one at your right hand, one at your left, as you go into your kingdom. Now again, false expectations of what's going to happen. She's imagining that she's asking for positions of high court in Jesus' kingdom when he assumes the throne of David. That's, as we know, obviously not what's going to happen. So Jesus answered, you do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink of the cup that I drink? Now, of course, he's using veiled language here. The cup that he drinks is going to be his passion and death. But they don't know that. So they say to him, we are able. He says to them, you will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to grant, but is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. All right, so he's assuring them that they are going to suffer as a result of their ministry. Again, but they don't know that. But he does say a curious thing. What does it mean when Jesus says that to sit at his right and his left is not his to grant? You would think that Jesus, being the king of the universe, there's not a thing that wouldn't be his not to grant. So some ancient commentators typically interpret this as Jesus saying something like, I can't give this to you the way you are now, the way you've tried to get it. I can't give this to you the way you're asking for it. Some people would say that, no, Jesus really is subordinate to the Father, and as a result of that, there are certain positions which the Father has ordained for people, which the Son isn't exerting any control over. I have a unique take on this one, where I think that Jesus is still speaking in sort of a veiled reference to his death. The one who's been given authority to seat men at his left and his right as he comes to his kingdom on the cross is going to be Pontius Pilate. There's literally going to be a man on his left and his right when he drinks that cup of his crucifixion. So that's my take on it. Anyways, let's keep going. And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called to them, saying, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be a servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for the many. And so this is where one of the locations where Jesus lays out the principle of servant leadership. He points out that in the secular world, people use power for their own good and to exert their own will upon people and for their own sake. He's pointing out that the principle of authority among the pastors of his church is to be service. That yes, they are going to wield power, and St. Paul talks about how he has authority to command people, but he doesn't want to use it. And the apostles, they have power. The elders, they have power. They meet in council in Acts 15, and they decide how things are going to go in the church. But it's never for their own aggrandizement, never to enrich themselves. It's never for the sake of their own pride. The power that is wielded by the apostles, the apostolic power of the church, is meant to be for the sake of the laity. It's meant to be so that they are serving, and that's why they get to be in charge as servants. Just as Jesus, who has the right over the whole world, is truly lowering himself to be the sacrifice for the many. And this brings us to the question that I always like to ask you guys. What do we mean when we say that Jesus died for our sins? Now, this is a frequent topic that I bring up because it's such a basic thing, but we can say that phrase and never quite know what we mean by it. The entire letter to the Hebrews is written on this question, and its answer is that Jesus is operating in the mode of the Jewish high priest on the Day of Atonement. And on the Day of Atonement, a sacrifice is offered to God. The way that sacrifice works is you offer up something of value to God in token of reparation. Now, I say token because the sacrifices of the Old Testament couldn't foot the bill for the weight of our sins, because they're just finite creatures. What does God have? What is a dumb animal before the majesty of God? But in like fashion, Jesus can offer up something of infinite value to God. His love for humanity, his love for the Father, his endurance, his holiness, his life, all of these things of infinite value. And that's what it means for Jesus to die for us on the cross. And that's what he's getting ready to do in Jerusalem. And so that's where we'll stop for today.